ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our meeting here in beautiful Troy, New Hampshire. My name is Shurtleff. For those of you who don't know me, I am the director of Camp Constitution and co-founder. And this is something we do almost every year. We didn't get a chance to have a table at the Cheshire Fair this year because our camp was going on that year, that particular week. Our next year's camp has already been, we have information about that. It's going to be the same location in Pittsfield at the Lakeside Christian Camp from July 28th to the 3rd. We had an incredible time. This year we had such a great lineup of instructors like we do every year, but this year I think we topped it with Lord Christopher Monkton, Mrs. Chris Ann Hall, Duke Pesta, and who else do we have there? Professor Willie Soon, and many others. And all of those are up on our YouTube channel, so we just encourage you to visit. If you're not subscribing to our channel, please do that. And if you're watching this through the Granite Grok, you can visit our website, campconstitution.net, where you can find out a lot more about us and our year-round activities. This presentation is called The Deep State, and I think something just recently happened. The New York Times, all the news that's fit to print, had this anonymous article from someone in the Trump administration. Well, I'm not surprised that there are people in the Trump administration that are working to undermine him. And I think this is more evidence of the deep state. By the way, the New York Times has been a far left, I use the word rag, for many, many years. Since probably back in the early 1920s when the owners changed. And back in the 30s, they sent their reporters to the Soviet Union, and they came back glowing reports. You know, this is the future. We've seen the future and it works. So it's been that far left ever since. So to get anything credible in the New York Times is almost impossible. You might get the baseball scores. They may be accurate. I would probably believe the baseball scores, but that's probably as far as I would go. So and I'm going to do an abbreviated version of this. I see the clock over here, so I'm not going to be here all day. This is usually a much longer presentation. Define the deep state, deep state bureaucrats, deep state intelligence, deep state money, deep state behind the deep state agenda, deep state and Trump, and defanging. That's the most important thing. Yeah. And the more informed a person is, the better. You know, when they were talking about Trump and Putin, the left all of a sudden pointed at the Kremlin as a bastion of evil. I said, are these guys right-wing extremists? Isn't that what we conservatives have been doing saying that for years? We're not saying that Trump's involved, of course. But since the communist revolution of 1917, elements in our country have been aiding and trading and abetting these folks, and the documentation is everywhere, and it's nothing new. And you remember Nixon going over to Brezhnev, and every time we come back, millions of dollars are transferred, if not billions, in treaties that the Soviets never abided by. But I want to just mention a few books here for your edification, and there's a lot of others which I'll be recommending as the program goes on. Our late friend, Dr. Michael Kaufman, and the environmental movement is part of this deep state. And this book he wrote in the early 90s, going into the philosophical underpinnings, the New Age beliefs of a lot of these environmentalists, many of whom are well-intentioned, but you know what they say about well-intentions, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. And this actually came from his estate. His wife got a hold of me, his widow, and sent me some of these books. So this is an incredibly good book, and I recommend it. Then I think one of the most, if this is somewhat new to you and you're just sort of feeling your way around, how am I going to learn about this? You know, where do you begin? You know, watching Alex Jones for every day. I don't know if that's always the best way to go. You're going to get the background information. This book was actually published in 1988 by a man who's a friend of mine, Jim Perloff. Back in the 60s, he was a leftist, bird baby bird, down with the establishment. He didn't burn anything, but you know, that was the mantra. And he asked questions, and there are a lot of questions that people don't like to be asked because they don't like the answers. He saw the big foundations, the deep state foundations, which I'll get into, supporting groups that he was in sympathy or he was involved in. He said, this is the establishment, this is the big oil and big business. He said, why are they funding us? And of course he answered his own questions, but he thought, well, they're afraid of us, and they're trying to buy us off. Maybe two, they want to use the money to control us, or maybe they created us, and maybe we're doing their bidding. And he decided that it was the third one. And he actually had a moral and intellectual change of heart. He was an atheist, he became a Christian. And he became, he actually wrote this book long before the internet was available and all these things were just with a couple of clicks in your computer away. He went to the Boston Public Library and he got the writings of the members of the Council on Foreign Relations in their own words. So it's no theory, it's no conspiracy theory, it's all, here's what they say, here's what they believe. And this organization is one of the most powerful organizations in the United States. And I mean powerful, I don't mean they have a big army, but they have a lot of influence. So I recommend this. You can buy it on Amazon. I have a few copies here. It sells on Amazon for very short money. The UN is another one of the insiders of deep state entities. It is a rotten organization. It was rotten from the beginning. It wasn't something good that went bad. It was bad from the beginning. The man who wrote the charter was a Soviet agent, an American spy, Alger Hiss. That should tell you something. And an early book, and there's lots of books on the subject. Some of them will say, oh, the UN's bad, we just have to reform it. No, the UN is rotten, we need to get out of it and encourage other nations so it will collapse. The Fearful Master, and this is Ed Griffin who wrote The Speech from Jekyll Island. This book is also available, of course, on Amazon. I have lots of copies of this one, so it's just a few. There's a lot of others. And also, a knowledge of our Constitution. I always make constitutions available for people who would like copies. You hear this word democracy all the time. We're a democracy. We have to fight for democracy. Our founders didn't give us a democracy, they gave us a republic. And there's a profound difference. And so this is an essay that we reprinted called Republics and Democracy, written by Mr. Robert Welch. So, all right, we'll get into the presentation here. Oh, that was a slide I was going to use. Okay, so this is interesting. Polls by ABC News, Washington Post show nearly half of Americans believe deep state and federal government. Now the term deep state, it may have been around for a while, but it became popular during the Trump campaign. But the term New World Order has been around for a long time, and people, of course, when you say that, they say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. And we're gonna give you some clear evidence. You know that when they throw that term out, they're saying is that we don't want to discuss the issue. I'm not knowledgeable about it. I've been conditioned to my knee goes up and I say conspiracy theory when you raise issues that I have no understanding of. Or they understand them and they just don't want to deal with it, right? So defined as military intelligence, we used to say in the Army, military intelligence is an oxymoron, right? And government officials who try to secretly manipulate government policy. Plurality, 48% think the deep state exists, while only a third say it's only a conspiracy theory. 1 in 6 say they don't know. 45% Dems, 46 Republicans, 51% Independents. But this is, I think, very important and almost, I would say, encouraging. 60% under 30 believe that there's a deep state. That's the group we have to reach out to. And that's what we do at Camp Constitution. We need to reach out to this group. Most of these people are going for Bernie and Hillary, but they know there's something wrong, you see. And if they understood that Bernie and Hillary are integral parts of this, maybe they wouldn't be so enthusiastic for Bernie or Hillary. Here's an article from The Deep State is Real. So here's a guy, Edward Snowden, love him or hate him. You know, some people think he's a hero, some people think he's a traitor. When people on the left use the word treason, you almost assume that person must be a hero. You know? So this guy said, there's definitely a deep state. Trust me, I've been there. And the Democrats see it too, because it's a question of how you define it. And the late Gary Allen, who wrote Not Dare Call It Conspiracy, find his stuff online on our website, on our YouTube channel. He does an incredible job of explaining it. The Democrats will say, yeah, there is. They think it's the right-wingers, you know, the vast right-wing conspiracy that Hillary used to talk about, right? I have not yet met this vast right-wing conspiracy. If there are any agents of that conspiracy in this room, please give me your business card when you leave. I'd love to connect with you. So here's, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Kucinich, and he understands that there's a deep state there. The Bureau, now this is an FBI report, the Bureau has gotten actionable intelligence that there is within the federal government a growing and organized movement to block or interfere with administrative policy decisions. Do you remember back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, the FBI was despised by the left. They were just a bunch of right-wingers that are breaking into the offices of progressive freethinkers and around. Now all of a sudden, they are nothing but an organization of virtue, full of patriots. Yeah, because they're full of Obama and Hillary types that want to take out Trump. That's why they like them, you know. Now this is something I didn't know about until recent. How many people knew about this entity? This Senior Executive Service. It's just like recently, A friend of mine, I asked our Dr. Kishore to do a presentation on vaccinations, and he didn't know about it, and he was a public policy, public health guy, Harvard degree. He discovered there was something as a vaccine court, been around for a long time. This vaccine court, if you have a problem with the vaccine, you go to this court, they hear your case and you win. The drug companies don't pay, it's the taxpayers that pay. But I digress a little bit. Highest level government managers, buffer between appointees and bureaucracy, almost 8,000 members, about 70% appointed to SES during Obama's term. Here's a definition of the deep state. Deep state became a popular term among Trump supporters to describe the machine trying to stop, smear, sabotage Trump. Can you believe that? Trump slams criminal deep state. A deep state defined in a 2014 by Michael Lofgren, former U.S. congressional aide, a hybrid association of elements of government and parts of top-level finance and industry that is effectively able to govern the United States without reference to the consent of the government as expressed through the formal political process, or you can say via the Constitution. And this is the book, and I have not read the book, and I may not agree with everything in the book, but it's something that's probably worth looking into. I'm going to skip that here, and that's, now, I want to point out that not everybody in the federal government is a deep stater. Not everybody, the postal worker is probably not a deep stater. Many people are motivated by their jobs. They'll do what they have to do to keep that job. If they think acting a little bit more aggressively will get them a promotion, they might be a little more aggressive in that position. So again, I don't want to suggest that every person in the federal government is part of the deep state. That's not true. But it includes nearly 3 million civil federal employees, according to the Office of Personnel Management. That's a lot of people. Our government is just a little bit too big. It's stretching a little bit beyond the Constitution. That does not include the more than 2 million in the armed services or the 20 million government employees at the state and local level. That's a lot of people. General Patton once said, oh, I know, sorry. General Patton once was talking about civil servants. He said they're like broken cannons. They don't work and you can't fire them. See, that's the problem. Politicians might be in there for a term, 2 terms, 3 terms, or whatever, but these deep staters are there for life. Or if not even deep staters, but these bureaucrats are there who doesn't matter who is in. If they're on the left-wing side, you're going to get that left-wing perspective no matter who is in office. Hundreds of bureaucracies, agencies, departments, sub-agencies, and more. Official estimates on the number of agencies range as high as 430 or even higher. Now, I don't see in the Constitution that these 430 agencies are constitutional. And that's really the argument here. Let's stick with the Constitution. That's the argument. Whether or not are they needed, they're unconstitutional. Regardless of agencies, almost all gave to Hillary Clinton. Now, this is a very important graph, which I hope you can see. And this is the donations made by federal employees. Now, there used to be something called the Hatch Act, which still exists, but they modified it a little bit. And I worked in the post office for 5 years, and I know there's certain things you can't do as a federal employee. But now, agriculture, commerce, defense, education, all these groups, 85% or more donated to the Hillary campaign, and only a small percentage gave to Trump. So even in the veterans, which you think would be more conservative, now not everybody in the Veterans Administration is a veteran, and some of them are. They figure, well, yeah. When I was in the post office, people say, well, yeah, I love Reagan, but I got to go for Dukakis or whoever, or Mondale, because Reagan's going to shut the post office down and I'll be out of a job. And then I don't know that's going to happen. So that's the mindset. It isn't that they're all screaming liberals, but they give to the left-wing candidates, and this is evidence here. This enough should be proof that there's something really wrong at the federal level. Now, Joe Biden wrote an article, you can find it online, How I Came to Love the New World Order. Okay, so that's where this guy's coming from, all right? He's telling these deep stater types, don't resign, stay there. You know, like once you get the moral high, or the immoral high ground, stay there. Don't, unless you're fired. And if you can't be fired, if you're a civil servant, they should do something really wrong. Clinton urged federal employees to stick it out, because the tide has to turn. That would be Hillary. Clinton, if Democrats can take back one or both houses of Congress in 2018, you will have people you can talk to again, right? Isn't that nice, Hillary? And here, Obama just made another recent comment. Some people just won't go away, right? At least 78 of Obama's political appointees even burrowed into the top-level civil service jobs, according to a report from the Government Accountants Office, GAO. far more than previous presidents. Essentially, they cannot be removed under civil service laws, and that's what we're dealing with in the FBI. Deep state monster, close to 500,000 federal regulations with criminal penalties. I love when Donald Trump, one of the first things he did was sign an executive order that said that for every new regulation, you got to repeal 2. I would say repeal 100 for every new regulation, but I'll take that, you know. Nobody knows the true number. When lawmakers asked the Congressional Research Service to calculate, the response was that it lacked the manpower and resources to accomplish this task. And this thing called administrative law too, you know, the Constitution says Congress makes all laws, but the IRS and the OSHA and these other groups make their own rules, and they can enforce them, and in some cases in their own courts, like the IRS, and shut down the business and close and destroy, and that's what they're doing very effectively. Remember that there was a documentary that came out, Aaron Russo, Freedom to Fascism, came out about 10 years ago. And he interviewed an attorney, not this one, and the attorney, he was a man that I think that was involved in the, he was the defendant for the Ruby Ridge people, the people at Ruby Ridge, and he was successful. Randy Weaver, I think was his attorney. He said, every time you put on your light in your business and open the door, you've broken the law. There's so many of them, or regulation. And here was more affirmation here. 3 felonies a day. Virtually every American commits multiple federal crimes each day without knowing, according to 3 felonies a day. How the federal feds target the innocent, by attorney Harvey Silverglade. And I think he's a Harvard professor. Every now and then something good comes out of Harvard, but it's very rare. Deep state targets. No, this guy is the ultimate deep state. There's absolutely, I know his face was worse than looking at Hillary's. I don't know, but and what they found was some people, mostly a couple of low-level people in the Trump Trump campaign, and the things they committed had nothing to do with Putin and Russia, right? So vicious takedown of Trump's first national security advisor, Mike Flynn, appears to have been a clear-cut example of the deep state. Now, when there were some investigations against Hillary and emails in Benghazi, there was where was this guy? Where was he? Yeah, nowhere to be found, right? Deep state intelligence, that's kind of interesting, yeah, see? The dog, well, the tail's wagging the dog, but yeah. But that's what happens when the people aren't vigilant and they just, Trump caused deep state to expose itself. Average of 1 leak per day. Obama used GCHQ to spy on Trump people despite official denials skirting record laws. Now, Watergate was really like chicken stealing compared to what this is. Yeah. You know, and we still use the term Watergate. You know, Spygate. Everything has a gate to it, right?
So does everybody know what GCHQ is?
What's that?
Does everybody know what GCHQ is? So this here is the Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge axis of communist evil. Government communications headquarters is the Brits NSA. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're using the Brits eavesdropping apparatus to spy on Americans to skirt American law.
Thank you. Unmasking scandal involved top Obama officials. Now, I remember when he said this not that long ago. He said, here's Chuck Schumer, a sitting U.S. Senator from New York. Let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this. He said this on Rachel Maddow's show, right? And I think you can probably see this on YouTube. And I thought that the President of the United States was in charge of the executive branch. And all these people serve under him, and most of them at his leisure, at his pleasure, right? But that's not what Schumer's admitting, that this intelligence community is almost this independent entity. As a senator, he should have been leading an investigation to expose this. Has he done that?
No.
Oh no, we're just gonna, hey, they're an entity themselves. I remember when they were talking about the CIA selling drugs in the inner cities for raising money for a clandestine operation at the same time, just destroying the youth in the inner cities. Where was Schumer asking for? There was no investigation. It was just speculation. They didn't dare go after him, right? And I remember, I saw this in mostly a largely black newspaper that had a mostly black readership. And I wrote a letter, and I said, because they had an article about it, said that white people don't care about this. I said, no, there are a lot of white people that do, but you've been conditioned to be, when they try to reach out to you, that they're extremist or racist and have nothing to do with them. There's a lot of white people that know what's going on in the inner city and don't like it, but unfortunately it's so hard to be able to influence people in the inner city because they're bought in by the far left Democrats. 16 no bureaucracies, CIA, NSA, DIA, estimate each branch of armed services, the Wall Street Journal, 1,000, estimated 1,250 government organizations, 2,000 companies, 10,000 locations, almost 1 million with top secret clearances. And of course, Silicon Valley is part and parcel of that. They help do all the eavesdropping and snooping, Google and many others. Deep State wanted ISIS, and we know that the Deep State, ISIS got, Castro was put in office in New York. New York Times put him in office. We can see other over the years, and I'll be talking about a few of them. But here's an example here. The West Gulf countries and Turkey support the Syrian opposition. The Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al Qaeda and other major forces driving the insurgents in Syria. And the Syrian leader, Assad, is pro-Western. He protects the small 10% Christian population. I don't know, I want to live in Syria under him, but I'd rather live under him than I'd live under some of these crazy terrorist Muslims. But we're still going after them. There's a possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist, fundamentalist Islam principality in eastern Syria. And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime. By the way, I heard a cute joke. The difference between a fundamentalist Baptist and a fundamentalist Muslim. A fundamentalist Baptist might give you a headache. A fundamentalist Muslim would cut your head off. And here's what's happening here. Here we are undermining around the world. Trump, in many respects, ISIS is honoring President Obama. He's the founder of ISIS. He's the founder. He's the founder. He sometimes repeats himself, right? And I would say the co-founder would be crooked Hillary Clinton. Our government has unleashed ISIS. And I'm going to just go over some of over the years we've had these false flag operations, Operation Northwoods, and I think I mentioned Cuba a little while ago. There's the ambassador to Cuba. He said, we, the U.S., are responsible for bringing Castro into power. There's a famous picture of Nixon showing Castro into, I think it was the White House or Congress, and the Cuban government was buying weapons, and the United States they were buying them from the Middle East, and we actually had the ship sent back, and Castro took over, and the rest is history. Now here's another ultimate deep stater, this guy Brennan. Now in 1976, he votes for Gus Hall, Communist Party, for president. That should have been a knockout factor if the CIA was a legitimate pro-American entity defending and that was the height of the Cold War, right? He's not qualified to be a parking lot attendant. I got a secret clearance when I was in the Army in Germany. Secret isn't really a big deal. I didn't really have any secrets. I was in charge, I was a guard, and I was in a nuclear unit, a tactical nuclear unit, artillery. And I didn't have any information about, where we're going to do it, who we're going to go after. But I just was, was in charge of that. I would look at people's credentials. For that, I got a security clearance. They actually had asked my neighbor, what do you think of this guy? Oh, we used to drink beer behind the schoolyard. Like, oh, okay, we'd give him a security clearance anyway, right? But this guy is not qualified to be a parking lot attendant. And my apologies to all the patriotic parking lot attendants out there, because most of them would do a better job than this guy. Yet he's in the CIA. And by the way, the CIA was always a left-wing entity. It was never a patriotic. I know Hollywood portrays the CIA as a bunch of super patriots going around killing commies around the world. The CIA used to be called the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, that was founded or led by a man named Bill Donovan, General Donovan. He was a colonel, became a general. A New York Republican. The reason why they changed it because it became so pro-communist. And someone asked Donovan once, he said, there's some communists in the CIA. He said, I know, we hire them on the OSS. We hire communists. That's why they're there. And it was interesting too, the very first elected official at the federal level to criticize the CIA, you'd be surprised to learn it was Joe McCarthy, Senator Joe McCarthy. This wicked, evil, horrible man. Communists in the deep state, and this book talks about that to some extent, some of the communists. This book talks about the communists that were involved in founding of the UN, American deep state communists. Noel Field was one of them, and he actually had to flee to East Germany when he was being indicted. And his nephew wrote me a letter. He saw my letter, unrelated to this, He was living in Norwood, Massachusetts back in the early 90s when I was opposing NAFTA. And he said he's a progressive or a socialist, but he respects, you know, the things that we do. Some of the people in the patriot community. And he said that my uncle was a State Department red. He actually used the term red. And I still have that letter. I gotta find it and pull it out. The Venona papers, back in the early 90s, outed about 200 deep state communists, and there's just a few of them. Duncan Lemmy, there was plenty of them. And what happened is that these people were never investigated. So, deep state intel crimes, torture, mass murder, gun running. You remember that infamous gun running Operation Fast and Furious? Drug trafficking, legal spying, kidnapping, regime change. That's not in the Constitution, is it? And you know something? When I had a friend of mine, we're not so much friends anymore, defending torture. I said, we are supposed to be a Christian nation. We don't engage in this type of thing. We're supposed to have the moral high ground when it comes to that. And torturing, generally speaking, you don't get a whole lot of stuff out of people. Most militaries, their soldiers know very little. The low-level soldiers know, they only know, you know, what's in front of them. They don't have any serious intel. And if you torture somebody, I mean, they'll tell you that the moon is made out of blue cheese. I mean, it's unreliable information. So, it's, but who are the real terrorists according to the deep staters? It's us. I saw a bumper sticker out there that had an NRA bumper sticker, or someone had said, something about they're pro-life or read the Constitution. You are an enemy if you're a returning veteran. And this was the 72 categories of potential terrorists and domestic extremists identified in Homeland Security documents include people who talk about individual liberties, believers in states' rights, seeking to make the world better, anti-communists, nationalists, libertarians. Anybody in there so far fit that description? Okay. Anarchists, what I mean, anarchists do. Ron Paul supporters, we're in trouble. Intolerance of other religions, opponents of the homosexual agenda, opponents of immigration, patriots, opponents of North American Union, opponents of New World Order, conspiracy theory, anyone concerned about gun confiscation, anti-tax, evangelicals, Christians, Jews, Catholics, pro-life activists, returning veterans. That's about everybody in this room, right? I mean, we're a dangerous lot, okay? Yeah, we're dangerous people. And that's Janet Napolitano, who is, and by the way, there's nothing in the Constitution for Homeland Security.
No.
You know? You create the problem, and then you have the solution for the problem. And it's always more government. And these are all the people that are part of this too. All these terrorists. This is the Department of DOD presentation. Okay. Deep state torture. I mentioned a little while. Remember Abu Ghraib? Am I pronouncing it right? Who got punished? Just some low-level, enlisted men. They were, and women. They were given orders to do this. I don't think they did it on their own. But you see, in some cases, if we're not torturing them, we do this extraordinary rendition. You know, I capture you, I turn you over to a private contractor from another country. So I said, hey, I didn't torture this guy. And deep state secret prisons. And here they are. Imagine that, deep state secret prisons. How about the drones? Under Obama administration, this progressive, free-thinking lover of liberty and freedom, and some estimates from 64, that's what they say. And we're talking in some cases what they call collateral damage. How about these two little children? How come you don't see Rachel Maddow talking about this? Or maybe she did she? I don't know.
No.
But how come you don't see all these, when you hear these, Trump went down to the border, the southern border, and there was a woman, nursing her little baby, and he ripped that little baby right from the woman's nurse. That's what they think. But they don't know about this. They don't know about this. Because they're not told about this. And when they are, they don't want to believe it. Bragging about mass murder. Senior intelligence official told the Washington Post that the CIA had been turned into one hell of a killing machine. Former leader of the CIA and SA, Michael Hayden, caught on video in 2014 bragging in public about how the intelligence apparatus murders people based just on their metadata. Isn't that nice, huh? It's bad enough that we aid and abet countries like China that have been involved with mass murder and the old Soviet Union over the years, but we're now jumping on the bandwagon. Illegal spying, William Binney, senior NSA official who spent 30 years at the NSA, blew the whistle on Stella Wynn. And I won't read all of this, but even Congress is not safe. The CIA is actually, of course, I think I've long speculated that many people in Congress are blackmailed, whether it's the CIA or other organizations. I actually asked a former colleague of mine, Bill Jasper, who writes for the New American, he's a senior editor. He was an aide to Larry McDonald, Congressman McDonald, who was playing with shot out by the Soviets in 1983. I asked him about this, and he said, there's no question. He said it's not as concerted as you may think, but they see a politician, usually someone, a freshman, they find out the weaknesses, drugs, booze, prostitutes, they like little boys, they like little, whatever it is, and they compromise them. Sometimes they bribe them and they have that. So that's why a lot of times you see, how come these people that you meet at the Tea Party rallies, they sound great, they get elected and their voting record goes down the tank. And that could be one of the reasons. So here is someone I don't think we like too much, Dianne Feinstein. You're supposed to say boo hiss when her name comes up, right? She accused CIA of spying on Senate Select Intelligence Committee investigation, CIA torture. So here they are, the entity, the tail is wagging the dog here. I already mentioned Operation Fast and Furious, Project Gunrunner. So all these DOJ, ATF, FBI, CIA caught transferring American weapons to brutal Mexican drug cartels. And they wanted to, of course, go after the gun owners in the United States in the Second Amendment. Deep state drug running, I mentioned this a little while ago too. Remember the Mena, Arkansas, there's all kinds of videos that came out during the Clinton administration about that, that they were shipping drugs all over the place. And it is impossible to pass tons of drugs from cocaine to U.S. without some grade of complicity of some American authorities. Mexican President Calderon in 2009. So there's no question about that. And the late theologian Rushdoony, Reverend Rushdoony, said that the organized crime can only exist with the government involvement or complicity. So keep that in mind. Cocaine for legal intervention. There's a book that's not mentioned here. It's called Red Cocaine. I recommend it. William Douglas, I think, was the author. I heard him speak one time on that subject. How the Soviets, the communists from the Eastern Bloc nation, worked with other entities to fill our nation full of drugs. And how many people are dying from from heroin overdoses now? It's like 60,000 a year. How many people in Troy, Ringe? I mean, can you imagine if everyone was, just these people all died? I mean, that's like 5 to 6 towns right in this close area. What's the population of Keene? Is it 50,000? I mean, what, 45,000? Yeah, it's amazing. And then this guy, I guess, of course, this guy dies. Reporter Gary Webb and Dark Alliance uncovered vast CIA machines shipping drugs into U.S. for clandestine ops. Webb died with 2 gunshots to the head. Officially ruled as suicide.
Assisted suicide.
Assisted suicide, that's right. Yeah. By the way, that's another oxymoron, isn't it? Suicide is when you kill yourself. So if someone assisted you, that person is a murderer, murdered you. It's not a suicide anymore, right? See how these, like the term police action. People come up to you and say, oh, well, we haven't declared war because we're involved in a police action. I said, police action is when you call 911, or, policemen giving you a ticket for speeding. That's a police action. Sending, half a million soldiers to another part of the world and they're dying and killing people, that's a war. That's not a police action. But this brainwashing that even a lot of good Americans have been involved in, they buy this terminology. The CIA has overthrown at least 7 governments: Iran, Guatemala, Congo, Dominican Republic, South Vietnam, Brazil. South Vietnam, back in the 50s, there was some anti-communist factions that were doing a good job of taking out the communists. But we sent in a team, and by the early 60s, all these anti-communists were just done away with. They propped up a man named Diem, and Diem could not unify South Vietnam, and he was taken out, and it was unstable the whole time. So we're fighting a war, North Vietnam, we had a fight, and he had an unstable government. The best book on that subject is called Background to Betrayal, which is about $3 on Amazon, written by a man that I almost met, who was actually a incredible guy, Hilliard Duverdier. But he goes into, it was Colonel Lansdale and his little clandestine mission in there, and how the left was so big on DM. And that's just one example, but there's many, of course, there's many examples of what's happening there. CIA and EU, you can say the European Union was hatched at the Council on Foreign Relations headquarters, and David Rockefeller, I think at the time, he was the last living person that was involved in that original meeting. Plus, there were many European officials involved too. Declassified CIA memo calls on Vice President of European Community to pursue single currency on the nations. The CIA, aren't they supposed to be worried about, it's supposed to be an intelligence entity worrying about threats to the United States? But here they are advocating, a single currency. So that tells you something really rotten. Intel-backed unions, kind of, the Tower of Babel, that's an artist friend, a manipulative artist. And that's the European Union in Strasbourg. It's on the right there. A pretty close description, right? Well, MK Ultra is another government entity. They used LSD and mind-altering chemicals, experiments on people in mental institutions and even children. And I sound a little bit like, who's the wrestler that had that TV show, Conspiracy Theory, Jesse Ventura. But some of this stuff is true. Deep state propaganda, 1950s Operation Mockingbird exposed and declassified documents aimed to hijack media to promote propaganda. CIA recruited hundreds of journalists, media executives. No kidding. It's a wonder why they don't come out. That's why you don't see any exposés of the CIA. Over 400 U.S. journalists carried out assignments for CIA according to documents cited by Wall Street Journal, Carl Bernstein, Washington Post, I'm sorry,
I was gonna say,
Carl Bernstein. No, I read an interesting book recently on the Third Reich. It said that Goebbels, the propaganda minister, would call in all of the editors of the newspapers and say, this is what we're going to say. We just signed a treaty with Russia. We will not say anything anti-communist for the time being. And everyone did that. There was no independent journalism whatsoever in Nazi Germany. Okay? Does that sound like we have here? Oh, you do have some here and there, some small papers. But as far as the major newspapers, it's the same line. They just argue they just vie who's going to get the story first and what spin they're going to put on it, but it's all the same. Another deep stater, William Buckley. Today, many conservatives will look at, he was the guy that started it all. He was CIA, he was Council on Foreign Relations. He was the left's favorite conservative, so-called conservative. Neocon, and the word neocon is, I think, incorrect. I mean, that's the term to describe. It's called neoconservative. There's nothing conservative about these people. And John McManus wrote a great book called on William Buckley called The Pied Piper of the Establishment. And a Skull and Bones member and CFR member. So definitely a deep stater. Deep state money. I'm not going to get too much into the Federal Reserve Bank because that's another hour or so. A long presentation. 5 hours, right? But we can say that our money has gone from hard currency to worthless paper. Forget what they call fiat money. Yeah. A great book on the subject is The Creature from Jekyll Island by Edward Griffin, G. Edward Griffin. You put his name on YouTube, you can get some shorter presentations that kind of go into what happened to our money. At our camp, we do classes on it. We actually have a class that's called, What is Money? And we use the term sound money. And you get a U.S. silver dollar that's made out of silver, and you drop it on the table. It makes a sound, right? You get a dollar bill, and you drop it. It might make a sound, but you can't hear it too well. So that's what we say. That's what sound money is. It's supposed to make a sound, right? Now, this is a very interesting. It was probably in the mid-'90s. I was asked to debate a man by the name of Theodore Conant, on a radio station in near Lebanon, New Hampshire. The host heard, he's a liberal. He heard me before, wanted me to debate this fellow, Teddy. The stipulation was that I had to, he was the trustee at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and he needed a ride to the museum because they had a meeting that day. His wife was in New York City. I said, I'll be happy to do that. Well, I think I held my own during the debate. Teddy's father is one of the founders of the CIA. He's in his 90s. I think he's still around. He had some assignment at Dartmouth. He was living in Hanover, and at Dartmouth near the college. And a very nice guy. He offered to put our videos on the cable access station. He said, I don't like the CFR. He said, they're a bunch of stuffed shirts. I have no use for them. But he told me that one of his colleagues, he worked for, I think it was RCA, one of the big media outlets. He said a colleague of his wrote a book to out, exposing these people. And he said, I'll deny this. No, we're driving. The show was over. I'm driving back. I wish I had a camera, a cassette tape, or what was available in those days. He said, I'll deny this. He said, but the CIA was hired to steal those books at the libraries around the country. I said, I don't dispute that because this book, Tragedy and Hope, similar thing happened to them. This book came out, I think, 1965, 66. Georgetown University professor Carol Quigley, a mentor to President Bill Clinton, Now, some of you might remember watching the Democrat convention, the first one, and Bill Clinton gave his acceptance speech. He made reference to Carroll Quigley. Now, who was this, relatively obscure professor that was mentioned? He had since passed away. He'd been dead for a while. Why would Bill Clinton mention him? Was Bill saying, "I'm your boy, Mr. Globalist, I'm your man"? That's what he was saying. And there was a fellow that is an auto dealer, advertises in the New American, full-page ad, seller Ford. His brother was a Harvard business grad. He used to mock his brother for his beliefs. But when Clinton said this, he called up and apologized to him. He said, "You're right." So now his book, which is a big tome of a book, and it's hard to read the whole thing. There's a book that was written called The Naked Capitalist by Cleon Skousen, which is really like a conservative or abridgment of that book, a critique of that book. So Quigley said, there does exist, see it here, the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. And he said that there is an international Anglophile network which operates a lot like the radical rights that the communists do. He said, "I know of its existence because I've examined its papers." And he said that he just wishes it was more well known. And this is the book Naked Capitalist, which is still in print. That's sort of what do you call those little things you used to publish for the high school, college kids, or high school kids? Cliff Notes, thank you, Cliff Notes, which I don't think they publish anymore. So that's like a cliff note, a patriotic cliff note on tragedy and hope. So I already went over that. Here we go here. Now, Carroll Quigley also, there's an interview he did. A man named Dr. Stan Monteith visited his widow and bought just a box full of cassettes. And one of them is an interview he did, which is very fascinating. It's on our YouTube channel. Well, you can just put down Dr. Carroll Quigley interview, because he's admitting this stuff. And what happened was, a man by the name of Edward Hunter. Edward Hunter was a man who coined brainwashing. He wrote a book called Brainwashing. It went over how the Chinese were torturing American POWs during the Korean War. And his book was also smothered. What happened, tragedy, the book, the plates, the Millen Company destroyed the plates, and it was never put back in print. But someone bootlegged it offshore, brought him in from offshore, and he got a hold of the guy. Instead of prosecuting him, he said, "Just cut me in, cut me in on the deal." And that book, Tragedy and Hope, is still in print. And so Ed Hunter said, "You really think these people are so great?" And I think Quigley had a little change of heart and wrote a book. Actually, it came out after he passed away, called The Anglo-American Establishment. So deep state. Goldman Sachs. Again, another 2 hours here. We only get about 15 or so minutes. Goldman Sachs. Congress thankfully said no to the climate. What do you call it?
Paris Climate Accord?
What's it?
The Paris Climate Accord?
No. Well, no. They were against the little climate. What do you call them? When a company uses too much and they have to get carbon. Thank you. Carbon credits. That's right.
Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. They shot it down, but Goldman Sachs was the entity that was going to sell them. And if you look at the Nature Conservancy, the people leading that, they're all coming from Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs and I call it the Green Mafia. It's all part and parcel of that. And you see it here, and you see the Green Mafia at the local level as well.
Oh.
Mega banks too big to jail. I'm not a fan of Bob Dylan, but there's one of his songs. He has a line. He says, "When you steal a little, they put you in jail. When you steal a lot, they make you king." And this is the same concept here. Here's a guy that, of course, is an honest attorney general. I was watching a little bit of the hearings, for Kavanaugh's and Cory Booker. Trump demands allegiance. He demands allegiance and loyalty. Oh no, but this guy independent, right? Totally independent, right? He would go after Hillary and his old boss in a heartbeat, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Now, when you bring up the term the name Rothschild, what's the first thing that someone who would disagree with you would say?
Conspiracy.
Or second thing, anti-Semitic, right? Anti-Semitic. So there are anti-Semites in the world, and we are not part of that, and it has nothing to do with what their religious background or the racial background is totally irrelevant to that. So we have to kind of get over that nonsense, right? The Rothschilds had decided the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars by putting their financial weight behind Britain, right? And then the bank, they still exist today. Baron Eric de Rothschild. By the way, some of the Rothschilds were persecuted by the Nazis. They all didn't get out. Some of them were able to get out. I think some of them were exchanged. You know, they had some prisoner exchange. So they did catch a little hell back then. But Eric de Rothschild openly supported Bulgarian Communist Party operative as Secretary General of the United Nations. Rothschild dynasty funded God, George Soros. Now, George Soros calls himself a god, by the way, in an interview he did at some point.
Who's that woman?
Deep State Business Interlocking Control, 2011 Swiss study published in the PLOS One on the network of global corporate control shows tiny group of entities, mostly financial institutions and especially central banks, control the international economy. I'm going to kind of skip over that a little bit. Now, this is some very important work by the late Anthony Sutton. Anyone ever heard of Professor Sutton? He wrote a book called Wall Street, the Bolshevik Revolution. So when these people tell you about, oh, Trump is a traitor, he collaborated with Putin. Well, they don't have any evidence of this right now, but we have plenty of evidence that presidents from Woodrow Wilson all the way to Ronald Reagan did. And we know what Hillary Clinton did when she was Secretary of State. She basically bartered 20% of our uranium,
Yeah.
right? That's not treason. They don't claim that's good business, I guess, right? And boy, getting Bill Clinton at what, a $500,000 speaking fee to get up there and mutter and stutter a few things. Boy, I get about, you know, we pass the hat, I get a few bucks, and I'm happy to get it, right? $500,000? You know, of course, I'm not a former president, but I get that. This guy was a Stanford University, Hoover School, Hoover Institute, and a really hardcore researcher. And I read this book. It's a very important book. He also wrote a book called National Suicide. That came out in 1974. In 1972, he was supposed to be one of the speakers at the Republican convention. I think it was in Florida that year. When they found out what he was going to say, they said, "You're uninvited," because the Republicans are up to their eyeballs in this stuff too. And that's why when you see all the contempt that these globalists have for Trump, all these Republicans, you know, at John McCain's funeral, you see the Bushes and the Obamas. Well, aren't they chummy? Oh, little old Georgie was giving Michelle some candy. Isn't that nice? They get along, of course they get along so well because they have the same mindset. They're internationalists. Guys like Lindsey Graham is another one.
Yeah.
I mentioned the Federal Reserve Bank, and I'm just going to kind of go, I'm not going to say too much about that. Remember the bailout under the Obama administration? I'm sorry, it was under the Bush administration. But what happened during the political campaign? They suspended it, and McCain went to the Republicans, and Obama went to the Democrats and twisted their arms. Right? Some of the oh, we don't want to bail out the bankers. Obama said, yes, you will. McCain did the same thing. I'll never forget, Ron Paul was at an event in Wisconsin, and it was like the day after the vote, and he was one of the keynote speakers, and the poor guy, I mean, he was like, wow. And they actually, I think the first vote was no, and then they took another vote and they passed it. You know, it was horrible, it was disgusting. And then they had the Obama bailout too. So when it comes to the banks, both parties at that level support them. Stealing your money and what happened to you know, what a dollar could buy. I mean, some of us in the room are a little bit you know, and they're 39 and above, right? You remember? I remember baseball cards, 5 cents. You get a big wad of gum. Now they're like $3 and there's no gum. Why is that? Because the greedy baseball companies are raising the price. No, it could be that they're just the value of the money's gone down dramatically too, right? Deep state foundations. Now the Ford, the Rockefeller, they've been around a long time. The Mellon Foundation, and this guy's foundation, the Gates Foundation. This man has taken over public education and some private education in the country. Right? I'm not a big fan of the Koch brothers, but can you imagine if the Koch brothers created Common Core, enforced it the way they did? They'd be, the left would be exposing it all over. There'd be hearings all over the country, right? This guy with his millions, and he's making money off this. They always make money off. Oh, he's just helping the school children, you know, baloney. And the Soros Foundation. You think the people that were let out of this, the hearings, at the recent hearings on Kavanaugh's appointment, you think they're just activists, or you think they're being paid?
Maybe
There were
they
pictures
could
of them
make a
getting
video.
paid.
Yeah.
You know that, they're on the dole,
Of course
right?
they're getting
You know?
paid.
Yeah, you know that, right? And, so here's Soros, an atheist, but he's so tolerant, he even funds Catholics for Choice, which should be another oxymoron, right? He's so open-minded, right? Now, I'm almost done here, I'm gonna go into the solutions here, but it's always good to have background. It isn't just something that happened in the last 2 months or 2 years, been going on for a long time. 1952, Congress created the Select Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations and comparable organizations, the Cox Committee, then it became the Reese Committee. Carol Reese, Tennessee, congressman from Tennessee. He actually hired a man who was a Wall Street banker who was a patriot, Norman Dodd. This interview, this happened in the, I think in the mid-80s. He was pretty much on his deathbed. He was able to do a clear interview. And Norman Dodd went to the president of the Ford Foundation, which was set up by Henry Ford, but taken over by his grandsons, and now promotes almost every left-wing cause out there. They're the ones that fund the environmental movement. And these poor scientists that, like my friend Willie Soon, Professor Willie Soon, ExxonMobil gives the Smithsonian over 15 years of $1.5 million. So he's nothing but a tool of the big oil. Well, do the math. That's not a whole lot of money for a 10 or 15-year period. That same entity will give millions to an environmental group that same year, and you don't hear any of these environmentalists saying, oh, we're getting money from the big oil, right? Or we're getting money from the big green, the solar panel industry, or the wind turbine industry. They don't talk about that. So anyway, he visited the president of the Ford Foundation at headquartered at the time in New York City, a man named Gaither, Alan Rowan Gaither. And and you can see what he says is, Gaither said, why is Congress investigating this? He says, well, your foundation and others like it, in paraphrasing, give money to far left and pro-communist organizations, and we want to know why. And Gaither said, we'll tell you why, because we operate under directives from the White House. Do you wish to know do you wish to know what those directives are? He says, well, yes, I would. He said, to change life in the United States to make a comfortable merger with the Soviet Union possible. Now, Mr. Dodd said, I almost fell off his chair. He couldn't believe nothing was being recorded, and it was all, nothing was supposed to be said once he left the room. He said, will you be willing to testify on this? He said, this we wouldn't think of doing. One of the ladies that he hired, because there had to be some Democrats to balance it, was a lady by the name of Catherine Casey, or Kathleen Casey, a real liberal ideologue, and she was supposed to investigate the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and she was able to get the dictaphone belts from 1910. That was able to hear the founding meeting, the minutes of the meeting. They were planning to have war. They were planning war. This Organization for Peace. They had a real invasion of South Africa. You can actually find it online, back in the 50s and early 60s. And he said that what she found so disturbed her, she couldn't function properly after that. She was so shocked and terrified, horrified by what she saw. And there are 2 copies of this Reese Committee report. One of them is owned by David Rockefeller, or was owned by David Rockefeller. The other one is owned by Charlotte Isabeth's son, and it's on his website. If you go to deliberatelydumbeddown.org or .com, I think there's a link to it. It's thousands of pages, but it's there to see what they were doing.
By the way, David Rockefeller was illiterate.
What's that?
David
He was semi-illiterate, that's right, because he was a product of the John Dewey's experimental schools. Okay,
Excuse me.
I want to.
All the Rockefeller brothers to David, they had dyslexia.
That's right.
For that reason.
That's right.
Yeah.
Who was it? The president, the Governor Rockefeller. He was very bad reader, and he had speechwriters.
Well, the kids were used as guinea pigs in a.
That's right. And what they did is that
School.
usually they use people in industry for guinea pigs. In this case, they used the elite.
I learned that from Dr. Blumenfeld.
Dr. Blumenfeld. Now, this book was written by my good friend who prepared most of these slides, and the late, and interesting, these Facebook memories. It was 2013 or 14. We had Dr. Blumenfeld right here
I
giving a
remember. I was
presentation
here.
right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I do want to say that some of you might know that I inherited his library, and thanks to our webmaster Eric Conover and Mark Affleck, who's our Camp Constitution newspaper editor, the same Blumenfeld archives on our website. Last year we got 2 million views, and I think we're going to do a lot more than that. So please tell people about it, promote it. There's some incredible stuff on there.
There's a great video from that. that seminar that you had here with him.
Yeah.
And if you just type in Sam Blumenfeld, Troy, New Hampshire Library.
It will come right up,
It'll come up,
yeah.
and it's a great video to watch about Common Core.
Yeah, yeah. So crimes of the educators, going into, we're not talking about the local school teachers either. We're talking about the people that set the policies and what have you. And this book just came out for 2015. All right, now I'm gonna kinda skip this because I'm just gonna kinda go over some of the deep states. I mentioned the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg meetings, the Trilateral Commission, which is sort of an international offshoot of the CFR, the Skull and Bones, Bohemian Grove. I don't wanna get, there's too much here, cause that's each one is an hour presentation in itself. I do wanna mention this guy. This guy just passed away recently, David Rockefeller. In 2004, he wrote his memoirs. And now, in the memoirs, he said, some even believe we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States. Characterizing my family and me as internationalists in a conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. Now, you know what happened when this book came out. You know that there was feds about to arrest him. We know that Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, we know, no, you don't remember all the news that came out when this, neither do I, because it didn't happen. Could you imagine if I was a mafia kingpin and I was accused of maybe killing 50 or 100 people, but there was no evidence, I was pretty good about it. And I wrote a book and I said, yes, I killed all these people and I'm proud of it. You think there would be some charges brought up against me?
Sure, maybe.
You think so, right? Nothing was said about this. And there's a hard copy and a paperback version. I'm not sure which one is referenced here, but I have a copy of the book. My friend up in Maine, Don Focus, he would buy hundreds of them. If you lived in central Maine and he crossed your path, he probably gave you a copy of the book, or at least definitely a photocopy of that page. So here he is. Here's the proof that it's not a theory, okay? And yeah, there it is right there in the book. Yeah, arrogant man. God have mercy on his soul. And Carroll quickly talked about. We get rid of the rascals. Get rid of the Democrats, bring in the Republicans, and nothing really changes except the name of the R and the D. And that's not quite the way it is, but it's pretty close because let's say about almost half of the Republicans, and not a little more, usually vote the wrong way most of the time, right? And some elected officials can see that. I'm going to skip. I already covered that. Council on Foreign Relations. Okay, I'm going to skip that.
Good.
Hillary Clinton. Yeah, I know it's the second time I had to put her up here, right? When she was Secretary of State, I remember her saying this, and this is on. You can go to YouTube and see it. The CFR is headquartered in New York. They opened up an office in D.C. and they said we get a lot of advice from the council. So this will mean I won't have to go so far to be told what we should be doing to get our marching orders, right? And how we should think about the future. Yeah, you can just go down the block, Hillary, there it is, right? And these are all over the years, some past and present CFR members. John McCain, of course. That's why he was so loved by the establishment in India. The maverick, John McCain, right? Theodore Hesburgh, so they've got people in religious entities. Rick Warren, the guy from the Saddleback Church out in California. The head of the Southern Baptist is also Richard Land. Of course, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Daddy, Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford, William Crystal, the neocon. So they got all the bases covered. There's about
That's scary.
Would Kavanaugh's name be up there?
I don't know if he is or not. I don't see it.
Is Gorsuch's name?
Yeah, it was.
Why didn't I see it?
So now being a CFR member doesn't necessarily mean that you're a deep stater, but it's definitely if I was looking for evidence, that's the first place I'd look. And there was a book called Kissinger on the Couch, written by Admiral Chester Ward and Phyllis Schlafly. It's a really thick book too, and he was a CFR member, but he was a patriot, and he said that there is a ruling elite of the CFR that they have a lust to surrender U.S. sovereignty. After that book came out, he was never invited. He was never kicked off the council, but he was never invited to another meeting again. So and he didn't mind. So we don't know how many CFR people in the Trump administration, but if there is a deep stater that wrote that article in the New York Times, I'm not a betting man, but if it were, I'd bet a lot of money that he is a CFR member. or at least vie to be a CFR. So that would get him or her an appointment there. So, and of course, big government, big pharma, all the big corporations. You can just think of all the big corporations, and they're all have corporate memberships in the CFR. There's Admiral Ward right there talking about that. So I'm going to now go into, I already recommended this book here, CFR. I'm going to skip over here. Brzezinski, okay, he just, another guy that just passed away not too long ago. His daughter is Mika.
She's NBC.
She's MSNBC. You hear her every morning with Joe, the former conservative Republican. He wrote a book, Between the Ages, in the early 70s. That book, you go to Amazon, it's very expensive. You know, and it's another dull, boring book. But he said America was obsolete. He praised Marxism. Marxism represents a further vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision. Marxism is simultaneously a victory over the external active man over the inner passive man. Blah, you know, and a bunch of Marxist gobbledygook. This guy was supposed to be a war hawk. He was supposed to be a conservative, right? He said, I was in Germany at the time. He was working under the not Kissinger administration, Carter administration. And I learned after I left Germany that he said if the Warsaw Pact nations invade, we'll give them half of Germany without a fight. Just take it. I was in that part of Germany that he was willing to give. So I'm not a big fan of what we call him Spig brother, right? Spig brother. Okay, now I'm going to go into your New World Order. You remember George Bush, Daddy Bush? He's in front of a joint session of Congress. He's announcing Operation Desert Storm, right? And what did he say? What we have here is a real chance at this New World Order. Then he defined it. He said it's a vision, that a New World Order is what the founders of the United Nations wanted. Now, I don't have a lot of college degrees. I would never led the CIA. I don't have a degree from Yale. But I know who the founders of the UN were. And I mentioned earlier, one of them was a Soviet spy, Alger Hiss. He wrote the charter along with a Russian, a Soviet agent, a Soviet citizen. So you think Bush knows this? He was giddy about this New World Order. Now, UN is envisioned by its founders. That's what he said. And you can find that on our YouTube channel, and just put down George Bush. And it was interesting, behind him were Foley and the Vice President Quayle. It looked like they were on drugs. They just had a complete blank face. I mean, if I was behind it, I'd be saying, what? You crazy? Say something, right? Nothing, just blank stares. And Brzezinski, Kissinger, you know, some people say and ah, and you know, when they speak, sometimes a little more than they need to. Kissinger says New World Order instead of saying and ah. That's how often he says it. He stubs his toe and says New World Order. Okay, so Barry Goldwater did criticize it. He wrote a book on the subject, or it was mentioned in the book, but he didn't really do much to oppose it. And now I'm going to go into, again, I don't want to take too much of your time here. And these slides are available to anybody. If you're watching this, send me an email. I've already uploaded them on our script page. I'm going to put them up on our website too, so you can have access to them. Okay, Skull and Bones. I'm going to go into what you can do about it. I actually had a relative of mine that knew Ronald Reagan, and there's a picture of him in Bohemian Grove. We got a few black sheep in the family, unfortunately. I won't go into that.
Yeah, it's one of them's right in our state house.
Who's that?
Your cousin.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right. Washington's warning. Yeah, he actually was warning and about the Illuminati. It was interesting too. I was visiting the Ridge Historical Society, which is a great little place to visit, and there was a book called Proof of the Illuminati they were selling. And I said, why would you sell this book? The pastor of the church, Seth Payson, that's what Payson Rose named after. He said he wrote the book, and he actually ran a campaign to run for the state rep on that topic, and he got elected because of that, because there was some real concerns of what was happening there. But I've kind of digressed. So the deep state's been around a long time. It just didn't happen the last 2 years. And I'm going to keep going. Roger Stone, I don't know really what to make of him. I'm not, the jury's out in my mind. But he said Trump's father was a big JBS supporter, John Birch decided. Trump truly intends to drain the swamp. And he said Plan A to take Trump out is Mueller. Plan B, the 25th Amendment. We all know where that would be. The 25th Amendment, it's a little bit it's a lot there, but basically more than 51% of the cabinet say the president's incapacitated, then he can be removed and the vice president will take his place, what have you. So that's gonna hard thing to do. Or the last thing you mentioned, assassination, which I hope, that's a horrible thing for any person to be assassinated. It's a terrible thing. What to do? Solutions: educate yourself. You know, you need to find the right source of information, because there's a lot of stuff out there taking down rabbit trails, and understand the Constitution, and that's what we do. We have go to our YouTube channel. There's some great classes on from some of the best instructors you can find in this country. Understand the Declaration. Economics. Again, you don't have to be just some basic economics. Theology, philosophy, history, science, news, and classic. Educate your children. Get them out of these public schools.
Yes.
They cannot be redeemed in this generation anyway. Educate them at home. Start your own school. If you belong to a church, try to get a church-based school. And so there are churches that have a lot of church. Or support the local homeschool groups if you can. Educate others, neighbors, friends, opinion molders. You know what an opinion molder is? Anybody that talks to other people. An owner of a business. Now you bought your car from, your doctor, your dentist. You call up radio shows. Even the small newspapers. The big newspapers, their circulation is drying up. Thankfully, the small ones are doing okay. In most small newspapers, a lot of influence can happen here. Don't be misled by haters, politicians. There is no easy solution. You're not going to have an amendment passed and we're going to save the republic. You can't have an Article 5 convention. It's going to it's going to make this country good again. It's not going to happen. I do recommend the New American Magazine, the online or a hard copy version. I usually have lots of back issues on different topics. They had the most recent issue had a great one-page article, how Trump is going after communist China. That's the first time I've ever heard any president going after China, unless they were going after them to give them stuff, from Reagan on. Nixon, or what have you. Nixon was the one that opened it up, and ever since then we've done nothing but doing what we can for them. While they're coming here and stealing us blind, right? And finally, there's some accountability. And again, that's why the deep state hates Donald Trump. Strategies. Constitution is the solution. Not to change it, but to get back under it. I was watching the hearings, a little bit of the hearings on Kavanaugh's, and this senator, I don't remember where she was from, she asked him about this decision on the so-called same-sex marriage. Now, Kavanaugh didn't answer the question. He should have said, the Constitution doesn't mention marriage, therefore we have no business dealing with states' laws. We leave them back to the states. That's what he should have said. A true Constitution, maybe he was told to, say as little as possible, get confirmed, and then once you're in, you're there until, either for good behavior or until you die, or until you resign. I know, they can be impeached, but defund programs at the state level. Stop taking the money. Stop taking federal money. Federal money is federal control. Now, you remember before Obama left office, he said to all the schools, he said, if you take our money, you've got to have transgender, you've got to let transgender in the bathrooms, and boys that want to play in the girls' teams, etc. Trump just repealed that, right? Again, the state said, well, then we won't take your money. That means we're not controlled by it, right? And again, we do not want to have an Article 5 convention. Lots of well-intentioned people and some not so well-intentioned are giving this a solution, and it's not a good solution because you got a lot of the bad people that want to see some profound changes of our Constitution. We have to get out of the UN, and it's all about Congress, and and of course at the local and state level as well. 218 good in the House to turn the tide. You don't even need that many, because some of them are just will go along to get along. Some of them will become instant patriots when they realize that that's the way the country's going. Education without action is frustration. There's a bill in Congress to get us out of the UN, H.R. 193. So, look into that and get behind that. You can, your congressman, you should have your congressman on your cell phone list. They should know who you are. Oh no, there's that guy from Reno, that's that guy from Keene again, Reno, my goodness. You hear him all the time, right? And because most people do not communicate with elected officials. This fair, the Cheshire Fair, was a great place to learn about the general public. When Obamacare was passed, we had a petition to repeal Obamacare. There's a lady that came by the table, she worked for a company that made medical equipment in Keene. She said, this is gonna probably put us out of business. Well, this petition is going to your congressman, do you know who he is, or she? She didn't know. She was, and 90% of the people that came by the table didn't know. I said, I guarantee you, the people behind Obamacare know exactly who the congressman or woman are, and they've lobbied them. And that's why they support Obamacare. So a lot of us, we don't even make the effort to communicate with elected officials or influence. They are the people that work for us. And there's something, it's called, the New American has the Freedom Index. You go online, and if you're 100, that means you're like a constitutionalist. If you're a 0, you're to the left of Lenin. And you see what people, no matter what they say, how they vote. And look at John McCain's voting record. You know, so not so great for this guy who's supposed to be such a maverick. I do recommend that you support our efforts at Camp Constitution and some of the things we do. We have a YouTube channel with some great instruction. Like this year, we have all of the instructors that gave classes, and for the last 7 or 8 years, we've done the same thing. So just sharing this information. We have a Facebook page where we post a lot of up-to-date things. We publish our own materials, Camp Constitution Press. We're going to be putting into print the 1828 Constitution Catechism. That's been, we're going to put that back into print. But we do put some things into print, and we publish a few of our own things. The Sam Blumenfeld Archives. If you want a place to go to teach people how to read the way that should have been done, all free. You don't have to spend $500 on a kit or get a tutor at $50 an hour. The St. Blumenfeld Alpha Phonics. I have, this is the hard copy. These are actually from his estate too. You can download this free of charge. All 128 lessons are there. You want to teach people cursive. You don't have to buy an expensive cursive course online. You can go right to a website. It's all there free of charge. All we ask is an email address and a name and a username. We have hundreds of hours of audio and video on these topics, on the topic of what happened to our education and not only that, but what to do about it. We have a wonderful family camp. It used to be here in Ringe. It's a few towns away. This year's camp was in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where it's going to be next year, and I have some pamphlets announcing that. We have a speakers bureau. This is something that we sponsored. Our local, supporters make this happen. But we have a number of speakers on different topics. Some of you heard Father Michael Call that was here. I think it was last year, wasn't it? And he got some engagements as a result of that being here. So check the speakers on our website. So if you have an organization, or just host something, even if it's a small group, we'll come in the camp archives. We have not just the Sam Blumenfeld archives, but we have a lot of incredible material on that. And we're in the process of trying to get young people involved, more involved, and create constitution clubs around the region. So if the campers come back home, what do they do for a whole year? Well, have a weekly or a monthly or even a quarterly event, either in the home or the local room in their restaurant, and activity, not just to learn about things, but also go out and take action. We have on our website, we have a PayPal account, and we have some people that make monthly donations. That really kind of keeps me in the field, so we can rely on X amount of dollars, from as little as $1 a month up to some people give 50 or more a month. Anything would be appreciated, and you can stop it anytime you want. You just send an email or go to the PayPal account and stop it. We also have a sponsors page. You have a business or a nonprofit, and with any donation on an annual basis, we'll put your company up there, and you can get that as a write-off. And I know that organizations that help us, like Granite Grok, will be happy to put you, if you'd like to be a sponsor. You're already helping us, so we'll just give us the information you want, we'll put it up there if you will. Because
by all means, post a link, please. Meanwhile, this video is live now, and the recorded version will be up.
But it's important that network is. We're not going to win this by ourselves, and there's lots of good people all over the country that are working together. And by the way, we had a gentleman come all the way from California, drove to our camp. He said, "I want to replicate this camp." He said he can't believe the great time he had. And we're going to have a conference call next week, and he wants to get one in Colorado and California, maybe one in Washington State. I said, "Wow, I hope we can make it happen."
It's a phenomenal camp,
Larry spoke there,
Yes, I've been there several years, and it's amazing how much the kids that attended learn.
And the adults that attended learn too.
The Constitution is on their mind all the time, and it's really great.
So we're gonna close with this here, Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So it is definitely a spiritual battle, and the solution is God. And I'm, as a Christian, I think that gives me the peace when people say, "Gee, how you know all this stuff? Aren't you depressed and discouraged?" I said, "No, I'm not. I can get every now and then." I said, "Okay," but that's where I have the faith. The faith that the peace that surpasses all understanding. So, and Psalms 2:2 talks about the king conspiring, and God is in heaven laughing at them, right?
Yeah.
And visit the evidence table, or the book table, as it's known as. And with that, I want to thank you, and until next time, God bless you.
Croc TV.